power of Kickstarter is undeniable. It's the prime contributor to the creation of many great games, as well as horrible ones. For every broken age, there's a day one Gary's incident. Sometimes you get gold, sometimes silver, sometimes nothing at all. Utilizing $27,000 of Kickstarter contributions, Animal Gods is a game that sets out to create a new top-down 2D Zelda experience for PC, Linux, Mac, and Wii U. The developers built their campaign promising a tight, polished action experience with a cast of characters and touching story moments, but it appears somewhere along the way, development seems to have taken a turn. The end result winds up being not so much a Zelda action game as it originally promised, but more of a short puzzle adventure narrative game. Animal Gods is a very striking and beautiful game. It has a similar stylization to that of Transistor, but with more of a tribal and fantasy feel to it. The environments and levels all look great, and this is emphasized by the dynamic camera that does a great job of showing off your surroundings. Sadly, this look and feel is heavily let down by the lack of sound design built around it. There are probably about 10 sounds in the entire game. There's sword slashing, arrow slinging, bird chirpings, cloak flashing, gods screaming, and some rain sounds, but other than that, it's a very quiet game, and the silence is almost deafening. There's no footsteps, no hit sounds, no teleporting sounds. It's remarkably silent. The lack of ambience really does a severe disservice to the environments. The music is okay, but it's very repetitive, and this is noticeable when it's all you hear for long periods of time. The gameplay of Animal Gods is simple. There are 3 temples which can be completed in any order you want. Each temple focuses on the usage of a different tool in the game: the Sword of Wind, the Bow of the Ocean, and the Cloak of Flame. You use these tools to get through the temples and reach the cursed god inside. After releasing the cursed god, you leave the temple and lose the tool you were using. Once all 3 temples are completed, a final temple is unlocked where you use all 3 tools at once to release the final god. Because you can't take each tool with you through different temples, each temple puts focus on a different mode of play. The problem is, none of these elements alone make any kind of compelling game. The magic of Zelda was never about focusing on one tool, but rather picking the right tool to solve the right job. There's no guesswork, no experimentation, no thinking required to these puzzles, if you can call them that. You already know what needs to be done, and it's your only option. In the Sword Temple, you use the sword to kill things. In the Bow Temple, you use the arrows to kill things. In the Cloak Temple, you use a flash-style mobility to get around. It's all very obvious and feels lacking. The only real enemies that exist in the game are these strange blue squares with eyeballs known as husks. Their job is to either stand still and block your way, or move around in a patrol pattern. It can take anywhere from 1 to 9 hits to kill one, and there's no way of knowing how much health they have until they're dead. This quickly becomes boring, as you're not allowed to move to the next part of the temple until you've killed each one in that section. Since all husks follow patrol patterns, you always know when they're going to be vulnerable, so there's no point in chasing them. If you do chase them, they may accidentally touch you, and if they touch you even once, you die instantly and respawn from the last checkpoint, bringing all of them back. This creates a lot of what I like to call stop-and-go gameplay. In Animal Gods, you'll frequently find yourself waiting for the moment to hit an enemy, and then moving on to do the same thing to the next enemy. Once you get to the end of the temples, you're expected to release the god at the end. My first thought was this would be a boss battle of some sort, but sadly, this isn't the case. Instead, you walk around another dungeon section, stepping on a series of checkpoints that somehow hurt the god. It's basically another section of the temple, but with the added bonus of hearing an extremely loud and obnoxious sound constantly along the way. It seems like these sections were meant to be so much more, but that's all that they ever amount to. Lastly, there's the story of the game. The Kickstarter is very clear that they wanted to create a touching story with a variety of characters and heartfelt moments like classic JRPGs. But with the exception of the husks and the gods, the only person who ever talks is Thistle, the main character. Instead, there are a variety of logs scattered around the world left by a woman named Juliet, which tells the story of her arrival and her time in this village. There's not many of them, but it does give enough insight into what's happened and what's going on in this world if you're willing to look for them. So what happened with this game? It looks like it had a lot of promise and many great ideas, but they were all scrapped or modified at the last minute. Even in the early Kickstarter gameplay footage, they showed off all 3 powers being used together against spider hatchlings. They even made references to RPG elements in their game, prominently showing off damage numbers in early screenshots. Well, the best potential hint I have for what may have happened to this game is given by the Spider God. In the Spider God's temple, there's a log that references the drowning of all of the spider's hatchlings. Moreover, when approaching the god, instead of releasing her like every other god, she instead speaks to you and says, "Without my children, I am nothing," and then begs you to release her. This leads to no standard god release sequence, but instead, the end of the temple. This is pure speculation, but I believe this game was absolutely more rooted in being a classic Zelda experience with combat, bosses, exploration, and everything, but I think that the developers ran out of money while they were working on it. Instead, they had to cut many things, including the spider boss fight and eventually even the hatchlings, as they no longer fit the theme of the game anymore. So if this were true, it would mean that the Spider God's words were more literal than figurative. Without her hatchling, she literally was nothing. Her boss fight wouldn't have worked, and they didn't have enough time to make anything to replace it. This theory of financial issues is also backed by the game being released 1 year ahead of schedule. It's rare that a game is released early, let alone by a full year. And finally, the game developers have gone on to say that they plan on adding a ton more content post-release all the way up to October of next year, once again making me believe that they need release funding in order to create what they originally had planned. This is a grim speculation, but it's the only one that makes sense to me. It's entirely possible that I'm completely off the mark, and I hope I am. This game does seem like it's created by a small and passionate team that just greatly underestimated how much money it would take to create their dream. I don't believe that this switching of gameplay was meant to be a trick or a scam, but rather just an unfortunate case of having too big of a scope and too small of a budget. The developers created what they could with what they had, but sadly, the overall experience was not enough for me to enjoy. If you're looking for a game with beautiful looks and some decent dialogue and backstory, then go check this game out. Otherwise, I'd recommend you keep an eye out on the project and see if it gets more action-packed for your tastes in the future. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the review. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're a fan of Sonic games, I recommend you check out the review I did of Freedom Planet in the top right there. It'll be right up your alley. My name is Highsight, and I'll see you next time.